Thank you all for joining me. I want to thank the Central Bank and EBI for inviting me. I think this engagement has been 3 years in the making. We had something called COVID that kind of threw us off. I really appreciate you being here, but I need to start with a qualifier, a caveat about me. I am not a technologist. I am not a finance expert. And even though some people call me a futurist, I don't really buy it. I don't believe it. What I am is a humanist. And I put that label on myself after 5 years of being the managing director of the Harvard Innovation Lab. And while there, I observed really, really, really smart people attempting to innovate all kinds of things, all kinds of technologies, and the vast majority of them failed. And out of that observation, I came to believe that the big miss in innovation, in transformation, in any effort to make progress is that we put so much stock in what I'll call the technology code, and we completely miss the point, which is the human code. And that whatever you're trying to make better, whatever you're trying to improve, whether it's a country, a company, your business, it doesn't matter. The thing to do, keep working on the technology side, but at the same time, get better at decoding humans, decoding them, decoding you, and recoding your organizations to meet them where they are. Decode and recode. In the next 30 minutes, I'm going to try to prove that to you. And one way I'm going to try to prove that to you is I'm actually going to ask you questions. One thing I've learned is the Socratic method is incredibly powerful. And rather than me just talking at you for 30 minutes, I'm going to interject every 5 minutes or so a question for you to ponder and think about. And if you're really willing to play along with me, I'd like you to close your eyes when I ask you the question and just think about it. And it's that internalization that I think will create the most value about what I have to say. So this title of this talk, I didn't create. EBI reached out to me and said, would you be willing to give a talk titled this? And I said, I would love to give a talk titled that, because I love that last word. Adapt is a very big word. It's bigger than transform, and it's definitely bigger than change. Now, some people think adaptation, transformation, moving the financial ecosystem forward is all about this. This is a slide from a friend of mine who runs a company called Future Proofing. And these are the 30 technologies you should care about. This is your roadmap. This is your cheat sheet. I'm done. Thank you very much. But the problem is, it doesn't work that way. The problem is this. Adaptation is an incredibly complex proposition. It's not as simple as slapping on technology. It's not even as simple as improving a process. It's a multifaceted undertaking that I'm going to argue is an inside-out proposition, not an outside-in proposition. Remember, decode and recode. That's what adaptation is. This guy understood adaptation better than me. Charles Darwin, 19th century naturalist, I'm sure you know him. He was the father of adaptation, or capturing the truth of adaptation. He was the guy behind survival of the fittest. And if you read this quote from him, it underscores the truth. The winners in today's world are not the ones who are the most intelligent, not the ones with the most resources, not the ones with the most technology. The winners in today's world are the ones that adapt best. And I think that's true at a country level, at a company level, at a banking level, at an individual level. So I'd like to introduce you to a friend of mine. Anybody know what this is? Well, it says what it is, Tuatara. So Tuatara is a creature that lives in New Zealand. It's about this long, weighs about 2 kilos, and it's considered the most adaptive creature on the planet. It has been on this planet, are you ready? For 200 million years. Not this particular one, the species. And so you have to ask yourself, how did this half lizard, half dinosaur survive to today? That's just crazy. And it boils down to 4 facets of adaptation that any creature tasked with adapting has to apply. And I'm going to make a parallel to the banking system that we have to apply the same basic facets. The first one, obviously physical. The second one, physiological, which is how the organs, how the systems within function. The third one, purpose. What is the role of the creature, of the entity in the ecosystem, in the value chain, in the food chain that it operates within? And then the final one, psychological. How does the creature think and feel? And how does it adapt the way it thinks and feels? Now, the most interesting thing about the Tuatara story is that physically, it hasn't changed all that much over 200 million years. But what it has changed at the fastest change of any creature in the universe, or at least in our universe, is its DNA. To this day, its DNA is constantly spinning and adapting to accommodate the circumstance that it finds itself in. And that's the parallel that I want to make for the financial system as a whole and for banking specifically, is this is a DNA proposition. This is an inside-out proposition. This is recoding how we operate, how we think, how we feel, what we believe, changing the fundamental mindsets of the role of our organizations, the role of banking, the role of finance in the advancement of our country. So that's the deal. Now, interestingly, 4 same facets apply, I believe, to the adaptation of banks. Just the terms change a little bit. So physical becomes technology. Physiological becomes process. Purpose is purpose. And one of the questions I'm going to ask you all later is, what is the purpose of a bank? Or more importantly, what should the purpose of a bank be, given everything that has changed? Because if you say to me the purpose of the bank is the same purpose that it was 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago, I would say to you, beware. Beware. And then the final one is this idea of people. And my point here is I think organizations, when they think of people not unlike the way they think of people, the way they think of technology. It's binary. Plug them in, pull them out. Plug them in, pull them out. That's not the people factor. The people factor is actually this, the psychology of people. How well do we as leaders understand the psychology of the people that work for us? How well do we understand the psychology of the people we serve, our customers? And frankly, how well do we understand the psychology of ourselves? At the end of the day, if there's one thing to remember out of my talk, is this is an inside-out deal. This is how do we as an industry, how do you as a bank, how do you as an individual begin to modify your DNA to do what the Tuatara has done for 200 million years. One little bit of bad news is I actually think all of this is in perpetuity. You know, the whole digital transformation thing has been approached as a fad, a thing. We just got to do it now, and then we won't have to do it anymore. In fact, we have to do it forever. Just like the Tuatara, the DNA evolution of self, the DNA evolution of organizations is now, I hate to say it, a cost of doing business. So, if this is really a lot about psychology and about changing our internal DNA, how do we know what to do? And one of my favorite sources, think of it as a cheat sheet for human beings, is this. It was created by a guy named Abraham Maslow. Anybody, raise your hand if you know Abraham Maslow? Okay, a few people, great. So this is a psychologist, American, practiced in the 1940s and 50s, and his whole thing was trying to figure out why humans do what they do, why they don't do what they should do, and why they should do what they don't do. And he came up with this model called the hierarchy of need. And I have come to believe it is a profound tool to understand ourselves. And his whole premise is that everybody in this room, everybody in this country, everybody in this world operates from the bottom up. So we wake up every day and subconsciously our first thought is, where's the food? Where's the water? Where's the shelter? Assuming we get that, the next level is, how can I make sure that I'm safe? Or in 21st century parlance, how can I make sure I'm in control? The next level is, where are my people? How do I feel a sense of connection? The vast majority of humans operate at this first three level of need, and they don't go any further. A minority of humans go to the next level, seeking self-esteem, doing the things they need to do to build self-esteem, to attain recognition, and then a tiny subset goes after what he calls self-actualization, which is the realization of full potential. I'm going to suggest to you a couple of things. Most companies in the world, particularly companies or industries that have been around for a long time, have been operating at the first three levels of need. As long as revenue exceeds expense, as long as things are stable, as long as we have a company, we're fine. And that, to my mind, is risky. Because that's what I call the status quo zone. We're just holding on to what is. Legacy thinking, legacy cultures, legacy notions, that's holding on to what is. Believing that all these changes, all these demands, all these new challenges are just going to go away, or that technology will magically take care of them. It won't. The critical factor is that all of us need to move into the adaptation zone. As individuals, as companies, and as countries. That if you don't seek to realize the full potential of you and others, you will get left on the side of the road. The problem in all that, the reason why people are stuck in the status quo zone, is that moving into self-actualization, realization of one's potential requires change, right? Implicitly requires change. And people hate change, hate it, including most everybody in this room. We hate it. But adaptation, fundamentally at the core, is about change. So what are we going to do about that? So to prove that point, this stat, this is crazy, right? $6.8 trillion spent on digital transformation. And by the way, the majority of that is being spent by banks. That number is 4 times MENA's GDP, 2 times the entire GDP of South America. Stunning number, right? How about this number? That's the failure rate. Study done 3 years ago on digital transformation determined that 84% of the investment in digital transformation does not yield a return. Holy moly. So you say, well, why? Well, how's that possible? The technology, it must be the technology. The technology has failed. Nah, here's why. Another study done by CIO Magazine. The top, I think, 12 reasons why digital transformation fails. Just look at those reasons. So how hilarious is it that corporations, big corporations, global corporations, are spending trillions of dollars on something they don't know what it is? I mean, if that's not human, what is? But I'm going to argue that most of the things in white are all human issues, And the vast majority of them are fundamentally connected to people hate change. It is uncomfortable. Moving into the adaptation zone is for the brave. It's not for most of us. So here's a double whammy. Not only do we hate change, but the pace of change is actually going a whole lot faster than we are. So you have this dynamic. This is from Thomas Friedman, who's a favorite author of mine. A theoretical chart for sure, but his whole point is the sort of natural adaptation of humankind versus call it the adaptation of technology. The gap between it and us is getting wider and wider and wider. And this has made it all even wider, and the task of adaptation even faster. So what do we do? How do we adapt faster? How do we adapt the banking industry faster? How do we adapt the world faster? And I go back to the Tuatara and the 4-facet model. So I told you I'm not a technologist. I am not a technologist. So I'm not going to talk a lot about technology. I'm just going to say one thing about technology. And we have a panel at 1 o'clock today with a bunch of people that understand technology way more than me. So we'll get into the technology stuff then. So here's the one thing I want to say about technology. And I'm actually not going to say it. This guy said it. Our responsibilities to infuse the technologies we make with the humanity that makes us. We have to bring more human understanding, more decoding of humans into technological code. And here's some examples. By the way, that applies to the financial system as well. So here are my 3 sort of poster child examples of maybe not putting enough human understanding at the front. At the lowest level, call it a tactic, call it a platform, buy now, pay later. I think it's happening here in Egypt, it's happening around the world, it's hugely popular in the United States. There's some 500 different buy now, pay later platforms in the US. Apple just launched one. You probably read about that. To me, the issue is it's on the border of consumer abuse. It's preying on people's vulnerabilities, right? The idea, oh my God, I only have to pay 25% of the thing that I don't even really need, but I really want the thing, so it's only 25%. It's only, it's a quarter of the cost. I'm just going to go ahead and do it and not think about the downstream consequences. And the downstream consequences, maybe your credit rating is crushed if you miss a payment. There may be an onerous 25% interest charge. My point is not against the technology. My point is, in developing the technology, we also need to be considerate of and communicate to the humans involved and explain to them exactly what's going on. And I don't think we tend to do that. Similarly, financial literacy, or financial inclusion rather, for the last 4 years, I've been saying financial inclusion is exactly right. And it has to be accompanied by financial literacy. Because when you give a human being a tool like credit, and they don't understand the terms, you are creating a problem. And my best example is the subprime mortgage collapse in 2008. The vast majority of the households in the United States that signed up for those onerous terms had no idea what interest was, had no idea what compound interest was, had no idea what they were signing. And so as we go forward, we have to combine technology with education, with understanding, with transparency. We have to put the human first. And by the way, I just want to acknowledge EBI's efforts as a training organization. Their work is critical, not just to the health of this industry, but I think to the health of this country. And then the last one is, at the highest level, is AI, right? The good news is there are groups all over the world trying to put the human before AI. Like figure out, when we unleash this technology, what will it actually do to us? What will it do to our work? What will it do to our system? What will it do to our way of life? The problem is there's no centralized entity. It's a little group here and a little group there. And by the way, we've already hit the go button on artificial intelligence. It's happening. And my whole point is we have to bring the human consideration, the human code has got to lead the technological code. As long as we operate in reverse, I truly worry for the future of the world, as dramatic as that may be. A friend of mine, Ash Carter, is the Secretary of Defense for Obama. He and I spoke at a conference in Harvard right before I left. And he said this, and I think this is exactly right. We can't slow this juggernaut that we've unleashed to the world, but somebody's got to steer it. And I think steer that at a macro global level right down to a micro personal level. And in between is company and bank and core systems. We've got to put more human consideration at the front end of these decisions. So the question I would ask of you within your organizations is, are you steering? And if anybody's willing to close their eyes and think about that for 5 seconds, I will hug you later. Are we steering? And I think the vast majority of us will going to arrive at an answer of no, not really. Okay. Process. Like technology, I have one thing to say. And I'm not the first to say this. I think for the last X years, this industry, like a lot of industries, has approached the adoption of technology through the lens of iteration. How do we take technology and how do we apply it? How do we digitize the processes we currently have? That's iteration, right? That's not wholesale leaping, that's iteration. The problem with that is twofold. One is when you digitize a process that isn't very good, I think you just made it worse. Or maybe you made a not good process faster. Great, great. The other is, I think it ends up in commoditization, where every bank looks like every other bank. And by the way, that is another fear that I have that Aiden and I were talking about earlier, is that if you go all digital, and it's all about efficiency, and it's all about speed, which arguably is the new currency of the world, I worry about where the value proposition ends up. If every bank has digitized every process as an old process and iterated on that process, I'm just not sure you end up in a high value proposition place. So the task is this, which is wholesale innovation, starting from scratch innovation. Not iterating what already exists, but taking a huge leap forward. I think Steve Jobs, great example. Elon Musk, whether you like him or not, great example. Gutenberg, the guy who invented the press, great example. Not iterative, wholesale innovation. Just a little nitty here. So I've done a lot of work over the years with senior executives at banks. And I have, and this may be an American thing, I'm constantly blown away at how many executives of banks and other big organizations haven't actually experienced their experience lately. They haven't opened a checking account, they haven't applied for a loan, they haven't gone through the process of getting a credit card, they haven't tried to transfer money overseas, they haven't done anything. They assume the processes and the enabling technologies are great. So my question is, have you experienced your bank lately? Have you experienced what it's like to be a consumer, or what it's like to be a business, or what it's like to be an SME? Might be worth doing. Okay, here's the big one. Yay! You know, one of my crazy expressions is, any entity, any organization, any country, any company, is simply an aggregate of humans. Sure, technology exists, sure, carpets exist, windows exist, food exists, but at the end of the day, the ability of the entity to create value is a truly, purely human proposition. I don't care how many bots and robots we have, at the end of the day, that will be true. And so we have to put an inordinate investment in understanding the human part of this adaptation equation. Part there are two parts of this. One is decoding your customers, right? Understanding who they actually are. So here's an interesting fact. And I saw this at Harvard every day. 75 to 90%, depending on the source, of startups fail. 95% of corporate innovation fails. 75 to 90% of fintech startups fail. Now you say, well, why are they failing? And it's the point that I made earlier. The graveyard of failures in innovation generally is not a function of the inability to build the thing. It's a function of the inability to get consumers to adopt the thing. And adopting is a human behavior. When I choose to adopt something, it means I'm giving up something else. It's a zero-sum game. So if you want to be good at innovation, you need to understand the customer. You need to understand their needs, their desires, their wants, their fears, and you need to figure out how your technology, how your innovation is actually meeting them exactly where they are. And most innovators don't do that. The other part of decoding your customer is this is from January 2022. This is Egypt's population, 100 million. You guys know this better than I do. You know, the stunning statistic in this is 76% of your population is below the age of 40. How many people here are below the age of 40? Raise your hand. Okay, how many people are above the age of 40? Come on. The problem is you are not them. You aren't. By the way, I think I did the math this morning. 50% of the population is 24 or younger. You are really not them. And so if you want to adapt, one of the critical tasks is all of you getting much closer to the truth of them, because they are not you. The way they look at the world, the way they look at technology, the way they look at their life is not you. They are not you. By the way, one of the cruel questions I ask senior teams when I meet them is, what's the difference between a man and a woman? And they all look at me and they're like, whoa. Okay, part two of this. I already said this. Decode and recode your organization. Decode and recode your organization. Remember this number. What's this number? Failure. Why? People hate to change. I think it's higher. I mean, I've run organizations for most of my life. I think it's higher than this. You know, within an organization at any point in time, there are probably 10 to 20% of the people that are like, ready to go. Let's change. I want to learn. I want to grow. I'm committed. I'm willing to take risks. I'm willing to do things differently. But the vast majority, not so much. So what this sets up is, as you think about decoding and recoding, you need to acknowledge that the core variable is behavior. It's behavior. Behaviors, as written by me, are the root. Behind behavior are mindsets and belief. So if my mindset is, I don't want to change, my belief is this adaptation thing is just going to go away, it's just a moment in time, my behavior will not align with or support the adaptation of the company. So teaching organizations how to manage to behavior, how to modify behavior is key. So what are the motivators of behavior change? My theory is that there are two primary motivators. One is called desperation. It's a fear-based motivator. It's a need-based motivator. If the house is burning, we know how to behave differently. We run out of the house. The other motivator is aspiration, which is a possibility factor, and it's want-based. I used to think that the only one that really worked was desperation. That if we show up at work tomorrow and we say, guys, if we don't adapt our bank, we're going to be out of business. We're going to lay everybody off 6 months from now. That would motivate different behavior. But I came to realize, yes, that is true, that might work, but ultimately it's not sustainable. You can't get where you're trying to get to purely on the back of fear. The other side, interestingly, is equally problematic because aspiration-based thinking, we're going to go to the moon without some level of fear. What happens if we don't get to the moon is problematic. It's almost delusional. So the right mix for any company, and frankly for any country, is this. Mostly aspirational with a little bit of desperation, a little bit of fear. So motivating behavior change, incentivizing behavior change, and measuring the right behaviors. By the way, I got a WhatsApp this morning from a guy in Latin America who saw me speak there a couple months ago. And one of the things I advise companies is to make behaviors the centerpiece of job descriptions. Remember, you're trying to adapt the organization, which means you need people to adapt, which means you need people to change, to think differently, to behave differently. Why not make that the measure of performance, or a critical measure of performance? And he wrote me a WhatsApp this morning. He goes, we've done it, and it's amazing. It's completely changed the context of the conversation with employees about their performance and how we are marching forward as a company. So this is a big one. I've said to CEOs, when you stand before the company, you say, this is the strategic plan. That's not really very motivating. You need a bigger idea. You need a motivating context. And my favorite example of this is Amazon. So their motivating context is something they call day one. And it's been around, I think, since day one. And it's the idea that every day is day one. Every day, Amazon is a startup. Basically, day one. Yesterday doesn't matter. Day one. Day one represents taking calculated risk, intense customer focus, back to decoding our customers, and recognizing long-term strategy over short-term profit. And I think that's a pretty good model to motivate constant adaptation. I'm going to skip this. Day two is legacy organizations who are like, everything's fine. We're good as is. Let's just keep working iteratively and marginally, a little bit here and a little bit there. And so my question for you to ponder is your bank or is your organization day one or day two? Okay, this is the radical. So we're all into dashboards, we're all into KPIs and OKRs, measurement, measurement, measurement. But if you agree with me that at the end of the day, adaptation of an organization is really about changing the behaviors and ways of the organization, recoding its DNA, then I think you naturally go to a place of, well, we need to create a different kind of dashboard. I'm not saying change out the standard financial metrics and all the stuff you currently measure. I'm just suggesting you add another kind of dashboard, which arguably is a radical idea. But what if we had a dashboard that measures the learning growth within the company, that measures risk-taking, that measures how aligned we are from top to bottom in the company, what level of trust we've established top to bottom in the company, and then lastly, what level of well-being our employees feel in terms of the company and its support. Number 5, here's the truth. Humans love hierarchy. We love boxes. We love having our own turf, our own domain. We love being in control. And so almost every organization over time creates walls. Departments are walls, divisions are walls. There are walls within the executive team. Joe doesn't like John. There are vertical walls and there are horizontal walls. In the natural world, there are no walls. And go back to Tuatara, if you're trying to adapt, I think you have to be honest with yourselves. The walls are a problem. And we need to figure out how to take down the walls. This is listening to EBI, seeing the awards that they've won. Congratulations, by the way, for that. I said earlier to somebody, this is everything. The capacity of a country or a company to realize its full potential is completely predicated on what it knows and what it understands. And so teaching and learning as a company is critical. And EBI's work is critical, but fundamentally it has to also come from within. Go back to remember this capacity gap. It's a problem. Now the good news is Amazon, this is like 2018, sorry it's a little blurry, $700 million in retraining their workforce. My issue with that is training in and of itself is not enough. Create an adaptive organization, we need adaptive people, which means we need to teach people how to adapt and why to adapt. Recognizing they don't want to adapt. Remember, the 75% don't want to change. So what's perfectly adaptive? This is my definition. It's a combination of intrinsic motivation, so I don't need you telling me I need to learn faster and learn more and be more open-minded, etc. I get that intrinsically, coupled with going after the skills, the mindsets, and the behaviors to realize my potential for the company and to realize the potential of my life. This is a model that I borrowed from a school in Dubai that I am on the board of called School of Humanity. This is a high school curriculum. So this is how School of Humanity defines skills, mindsets, and behaviors necessary for adaptation of the individual. Just scan the list. Imagine if every employee in your company had these capacities. Or another way to look at it is, imagine how many don't have any of these capacities or very few of these capacities. And this is just a study from McKinsey 2020 that points out this is where it's all trending. That more and more organizations are realizing this fourth point, adaptability and continuous learning are essential. And by the way, this is not a human resources problem to solve, it's an organizational problem to solve. So one of the very uncomfortable questions I ask people, managers, executives that I meet is, what did you teach yesterday? In your work, at work, what did you teach? And 99% of the time, they look at me like, what are you talking about? I'm like, we're here to teach. We're here to develop. Again, the adaptation of the company requires the adaptation of the people, which requires the people to learn how to adapt, which requires teaching. It doesn't happen magically. There's no immaculate conception here. It happens through our commitment to teaching and learning. And just conclude this with this. So what do employees want? Most employees. And I apply the Maslow hierarchy to the question. They want tools, base level, physiological need. They want some sense of trust, that they are trusted, that there's an environment that is safe where they can bring their ideas forward. They want some level of connection, call it teamness. They want recognition and appreciation. And lastly, and most importantly, some percentage of employees, and certainly not all employees, maybe that 25% that want to change, want to achieve a level of mastery in what they do. They want to have a level of autonomy, call it individual freedom. And finally, they want to connect to purpose. They want their job to be more than a job. They want their company to be more than a company. They want what they do to have meaning. And right now in the United States, purpose is a very big topic in the biggest companies across the land because employees are effectively demanding for bigger, better, and clearer purpose. So it brings up the last part of the adaptation circle, purpose. So what is the purpose of a bank? And for sake of time, I'm not going to get into my point of view on what I think the purpose of a bank should be. I'll just reiterate what I said earlier, which is it can't be the purpose that it has been. It can't be the purpose that it was 10 years ago. I honestly don't think that's sustainable. I think you go back to your offices and you talk to your peers and you're like, what is the purpose? What is the value proposition that is distinct and relevant and most importantly, sustainable given what is happening with competition, what is happening with technology, and what is happening with our customers? I think you have to ask yourself that question. So the next level is, what's the purpose of a central bank? Now, interestingly, I've been watching the Fed for my whole life, and I've come to believe that the Federal Reserve of the United States of America, its purpose is as written. Its purpose is stability, which is remarkably presumptuous. It kind of sort of assumes economic progress. It assumes well-being. It assumes all sorts of things. And fundamentally, if Jerome were here, I would look at him and say, you're wrong. Your purpose has to be bigger. It has to be grander. It has to be more aspirational. And it has to focus on the well-being of every citizen of this country. And hats off, and this is not, I don't do this, so I tend to be more of a critic than a complimenter, but I think hats off to the Central Bank of Egypt. The work that you're doing, even the existence of EBI, as a matter of fact, is proof that you understand that the purpose of a central bank has to be more than achieving economic stability. So the last one is this: what should the purpose of a country be? A lot of countries think their purpose is this: economic growth, gross domestic product. As long as the number is going up, everything is great. Some countries also bring in this, the UN Sustainability Goals, which I think are pretty good, spot on. Yes, every country needs to be working at these things. But I think it's not quite right, and it certainly isn't particularly motivating. And so I borrow from Macron, who once said this: for society to be sustainable, you have to restore the equality of chances. The equality of chances. So I think about that through the lens of Maslow. And really what we want in society, and what I want for your society, is that every Egyptian citizen has the ability and gets the support to realize their full potential. There is no strata, there is no economic, separation, that every human being can realize what it is they seek to realize. Every human being has equal chance. And that, I believe, should be the measure of a 21st century country. And I've been playing with this idea called the Opportunity Index, which takes Maslow's hierarchy and rolls it into a set of sub-measures where we look at structural issues, we look at personal issues, and we look at environmental issues. And we measure those things in addition to all the other things we measure. Kind of like the dashboard I talked about for adaptation. And just to finish up, let's say you do all this. Let's say you focus on equality of chances. Let's say you start building the Opportunity Index. The other thing you need to do, or I encourage you to do, is think about creating a national motivating context. America used to have a motivating context. And it was a context based on possibility, aspiration, with a little fear. And it was a context coupled with policies that drove fabulous economic growth, created a massive middle class, made us a global superpower. From the 50s, 60s, 70s on, the American dream. And most citizens in the country knew about the American dream. It was messaged to them, it was promoted to them, and the government supported the realization of the dream for them. Sadly, I believe we are at the end of our dream. That the possibility-fear ratio has flipped, and we are now a country dominated by fear, and the sense of possibility seems to be slipping away. Your country, on the other hand, I believe, and I'm not saying this to make you feel good, I really do believe it, is on the cusp of your own incredible trajectory. Everything I've read, everything I've studied, and every Egyptian that I've talked to since I've been here confirms that belief. And so imagine, if you will, your own version. Call it the Egyptian dream. And in this version, it's a combination of how we message, how we communicate, the policies we create, and underneath that, how the banking system, as the critical enabler, operates. So the adaptation task is not a selfish task. It's a national task. How does this industry evolve to enable every citizen within the country to realize their full potential, and in doing so, realize the Egyptian dream? I just leave you this. No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. You know, some of the things Einstein said are like a little, woo, you know? What I think he's saying is we have to let go of what we thought. We have to achieve a different level of consciousness, a different level of awareness. In order to do this, we have to look within. We have to challenge our mindsets. We have to challenge our beliefs. And fundamentally, we have to recode our DNA. That if you walk out of here believing that what was yesterday is what will be tomorrow, I'm not sure you get to where you're trying to get to. And the upside to this is the realization of your organization's potential, the realization of all of your fellow Egyptians' potential, and ultimately the realization what is truly an incredible country with an incredible future. And I look forward, I said to somebody earlier, I'm going to come back in 5 years, and I'm guaranteed I will be blown away at what you have all accomplished. So with that, thanks very much.